Have you ever heard the words or the term lost in translation? So I was thinking about this last weekend, and I talked a little bit about this on my Facebook group page the other day. I actually got to go home last week for spring break. Now, normally we would go somewhere fun, do a cruise, do something exotic, destination experiences, all that fun stuff. But this year, we really felt called to go home. I um I think maybe after the conversation that I had with Jonathan on the show, maybe the fact that we're getting a little bit older, we really just felt the need to go home and spend some time with family. Now, the great thing about that is that I talked a lot about how Rachel and I met. We met in college 26 years ago, and her family lives on the east side of the state of Michigan, and my family lives on the west side or by Lake Michigan. So for us, I had this grandiose idea that I wanted to fly us there on our own in our plane, not even calculating the fact that it was still winter in Michigan. So as I'm kind of watching the weather and I built out my flight plan and I'm looking over everything and I start to see some iffy travel patterns. So when I start really looking inside and doing the planning and calling for weather briefs and stuff like that, what I notice is that the Friday before we're supposed to leave, it snowed. So clearly that's not going to work. Now, there are a lot of people who may listen to the show and say, I don't understand, why wouldn't you want to fly with snow? Um, there could be icing on the wings. There could be a lot of different things that could go wrong with that. And I did not feel like it was that important to put my family's life in jeopardy with weather. So we opted to fly commercial. So we waited to go Sunday. We went after church. Then we got home Saturday so that we could be home in time for church. Where I'm going with all of this is that over the week, I had some really amazing conversations with my family. Just a lot of different really cool things that were kind of going on. Now, what I love about going to my parents' house is that it always reminds you of where you came from. I mean, think about that. Who are the people who know you the best? Now, think about every embarrassing story, every funny, stupid, crazy thing that you've ever done. And if you're fortunate to have brother and sister like I was, there are a lot of things that can keep you grounded in who you are as a person. Now, I don't go home very often. I just haven't. I got out of the Navy. I went to college, met Rach, had Jonathan come live with us, and we were pretty much on our own. And then I got relocated to the East Coast, and life just kind of happened. And we just didn't make priority family or family being a priority or even going home. So last week again, we're having these great conversations. My parents I have shared about the belief in the Christianity doctrine that I grew up with and how it tied me up into knots. And one of the crazy things that's funny about all that though is that my dad has this collection of really, really amazing books. I mean, Bible things that, I always say that when you read the Bible, you have to really know what's going on. And my dad has he's amassed quite a collection of these study books, study Bibles, concordances, books of tradition, books that I hadn't even heard about. And we're having these conversations about things, and things are getting lost in translation. And that's really where, I started to think about this as I was having these conversations with my mom and dad. And I was kind of going back and I was thinking of some things that we all might remember as lost in translation. So, when I think about some of them, I'm going to show my age here a little bit. And there was an airline called Braniff International. They decided that they were going to sell their luxurious, comfortable first class seats to their customers. Unfortunately, They didn't get the translation right. So Braniff actually had their slogan as "Fly in Leather," which back in those days was a big deal because leather seats in first class, that was kind of a funny thing. However, the direct translation when they were in Spain was "in cuero," which means fly naked. Lost in translation. So there was another one, Mercedes Benz. They went into the Chinese market. And when it's translated to Benzi, Benzi meant rush to die. So they had to do some name changing. Mercedes Benz did. Coors was another one. So we all know Coors, they're the American beer company, and they tried to translate the phrase turn it loose. However, again, in Spanish, it was an epic fail because it translated the slogan into suffer from diarrhea. Now, how many of you would order something if you were suffering from diarrhea? There was another one too I was kind of thinking of. Back in the 70s, I was super young. There was a car called the Pinto, and they made a whole slogan about the car. And when they sent the car down to Brazil, they couldn't sell any of these cars and they couldn't figure out why. And then they realized that Pinto is little genitals in Spanish. So evidently, no one wanted to buy little genitals in their car. Now, where am I going with all this? So, as I was having these conversations with my mom and dad, and we're talking about heaven and hell and Bible conversations and the things that I'm learning in Bible college, in my Gospels class, and we're having this crazy conversation. So now, here's some food for thought. When we talk about Rahab in Genesis, and we talk about Rahab being a prostitute, that is actually a lost in translation. So if you go back and you actually study that culture, and thanks to my gospel teacher who just shared this with me last week because I was kind of mind blown. Rahab was not a prostitute. So if you actually go back to the original language, she was a harlot. And for those people in that particular time that wrote about harlots and that kind of a thing, they were actual temple priestesses. Now, am I condoning prostitution or harloting or whatever you want to call it? No, but it changes the dynamic of who we know as the woman because we think prostitute here, it's a brothel, it's a person on the street. This woman had a very, very high elevated position, and you can actually see that because she is the head of her household, which means that if you go back and you read it again, all of her family lived with her. Now, what's so cool about that story, though, is that Rahab, what I had learned in class, is that being a high priestess, of this pagan relationship of where they were in Canaan, that they would have gone out and made these gigantic monuments, which we've seen examples of today. And the people in the community would have had sex with her and the other temple goddesses because they represented fertility. So they weren't just making a quick buck. And again, Rahab, because of her position, was probably a very, very highly elevated high priestess in this temple. It kind of changes the dynamics of what we think when we think prostitute. Oh, she was a prostitute, a hoe. She was actually an elevated in their religion priestess. So it changes the dynamic. So now here's another one for you. When the man on the cross says to Jesus, remember me, for I will be in paradise. Now, remember me when you are in paradise. Now, what does that actually mean? If you go back and you actually read the translations of what that is, it's actually taken from the word paradisio or paradis in Hebrew, Aramaic, and again, even in the translation into the Septuagint, which we could have a whole other conversation about that. Um, we mistranslate that. So here we're thinking paradisio, paradise must mean everlasting life somewhere else. Actually, it's a referral to the Garden of Eden. Now remember, the entire story of the Bible starts off with what? A man and a woman are made in God's image. They're born into a garden of this incredible connection with nature, with God, and with all of the other amazing things that are going on with it. They cannot die until they eat from the tree. Now, we can debate whether it was an apple, whether it was whatever, we don't really know. But again, when you think about how the Bible is written, God makes a covenant with this guy, Abraham, and he says, regardless of what you do as a human, I am never going to leave you. You might leave me, but I'm never going to leave you. And they make this blood oath covenant. So the entire story of the Bible is God bringing covenant back to man. Man sins, man screws up, man cries out, God comes back, he helps them defeat all of their enemies. They're constantly in war. I mean, they are constantly challenging, constantly questioning, and God's always there. So the paradise, again, is going back to the Garden of Eden. That was the referral. And then the other thing that I challenge you to look at is the other word, eternal life, or phrase, eternal life. Now, here, what does eternal life mean to you? What do you think of when you hear eternal life? I always believed that when I died, I went somewhere else and I stay there forever in a white robe. Who looks good in a white robe? Can you play sports in a white robe? Can you run in a white robe? Can you do all the things you're supposed to be doing in heaven in a white robe? Now, and if there's like this gigantic banquet, um, what happens if I spill something on my white robe? Does it get dirty? I don't know. Anyway, so when we think about that word or that phrase, eternal life, the actual Hebrew translation is not at all what we think it is. So again, we think eternal life, 365 days, 365 days, 365 days. The actual phrase for eternal life was olam haba, which meant roughly end of the age. So again, we've got this man and woman over here who sin. God kicks them out of the garden and they go east of Eden. It's been covered by a couple of angels with some swords that are flaming, and they continue on their journey east of Eden. God's continually calling this covenant back to the people. He's bringing ways for them to come back. They keep screwing up. And the entire thing is creating a new heaven on earth. It is not a fly away, go somewhere else, and we're going to live forever, but we're going to go somewhere else. Um, I don't agree with what that is because the translation of the end of the age is ushering in a new age. So there's time periods that are happening in this wording. It is not something like what we think of with 365 linear calendar days. Now, where I'm going with this, I saw so many posts this last weekend, Easter weekend, the Super Bowl of all holidays, according to what our pastor said on Sunday. And kind of is if you think about it, because Jesus rose from the dead. Now, whether you believe or you don't believe, I actually have another book that my dad gave me. The guy's name was Josephus. Now, Josephus was a Roman historian. He wrote a great book called Josephus, of Antiquities, and he documents all of the stuff that's actually going on in Rome and in Israel and all the other places around that time. And he writes about a true man named Jesus. I mean, historically, we can't deny this. He did exist. So when you think paradise, you'll be with me, and it's the Garden of Eden, and it's eternal life. Eternal life doesn't really mean eternal life. Actually, eternal life means end of the age. Jesus is bringing a new age. That's what the whole fulfillment of the prophecy is. So I'm listening to people on Facebook talk about eggs and bunnies. And they are talking about the pagan holidays, about eggs and bunnies. And I've talked to other people about Christmas and the Christmas tree and the belief in Satan, Santa Claus. And there's all of this insanity. Now, I think one of them that I actually saw said, you are going to be triggered by this. And I was watching it. I was like, yeah, I am. I'm triggered because you don't know what you're talking about. And I'm triggered because you have kids in the background that you think you're doing something great for and you're protecting them from all of this, whatever. I'm triggered because you have no idea what you're talking about. My kids, my 7 and 9 year olds, who I talk about on the show quite a bit, they woke up in the morning and I feel this tap on my shoulder and a daddy. They are so excited about the Easter Bunny coming. So excited. Now, does it matter to me what the historical pagan tradition was so long ago? I don't think so. And I'll tell you why I don't think so. When you read the story between Peter and Jesus, and he's talking about building his church on Peter. Again, lost in translation because the Catholic Church says that they're building the church because that's what Peter got, what Jesus told Peter. It's actually not true. There were two type of Peters, or Pedro or Petra. So one is Big Rock, Jesus, who is the rock, who's going to build his church on his foundation, his yoke, his beliefs, his systems. And then there's the little pebble, which was Peter. Now, what he says after this is the gates of hell shall not prevail against you. Now, what does he mean by that? Where they are actually standing in Caesarea Philippi is the center of Pan worship. Now, again, you got to go back and learn your history about what all this means. So, Pan, if you remember, was the half goat, half man. He was all about having orgies and sex. And the place where they were having this conversation, Jesus and Peter, were actually at the center of a big hole in the mountain where they had all of these pan sacrifices and orgies and all of these things. And the people in the area would have referred to that as the gates of Hades. Again, we've had the conversation about hell, and there are three types of hell that they reference in the Bible that are not actual places like what we think with a guy in red tights and pitchfork and all this other stuff. So I go back to listening to these rants on social media about things that got lost in translation. So eggs and bunnies and not celebrating and all of these other things that are robbing ourselves of joy because of something that happened some time ago, somewhere that we think applies to today. I wholeheartedly disagree with this. I believe that Jesus Christ rose, and I believe that we are to create heaven here on earth. We are not going away and flying to Old Glory or somewhere else and missing out on the opportunity for joy here. Most of the time, when I am talking to people who are anxious or depressed, or they have fears and all of these other things, they are robbing themselves of the expression or the opportunity to create heaven here. I was talking to a couple of friends over the last couple of days who were talking about their depression and about their sadness and how overwhelmed they were. And I said, when's the last time you did something for someone else? Because if you have spent so much time trying to figure out how to make the world a little better, how to make your neighbor's life a little better, or how to buy somebody a donut behind you in a line, or say it's a very beautiful hat, or just little things to make someone else's day, you will find that you'll feel better about yourself. And the more that you think about other people, the less you're going to think about your own problems. So I don't know who you are today. I don't know what you're suffering from. I don't know what your rant is. But I'll tell you, most of the things that we think we know in the Bible are lost in translation. And I encourage you to go back and find out what they are. Go back and question and challenge the beliefs that you have. Why do you believe them to begin with? Because we've had this conversation before. Your beliefs come from someone else's beliefs that came from someone else's beliefs. And what you do, the first thing you do in the morning is what you are a disciple of. You're a disciple of something. It could be your body and fitness, could be meditation, could be your kids, it could be something. But you are a slave to something that is holding you back from creating heaven here on earth. I don't believe, again, that we are going anywhere else and that we're creating our own version of hell here right now in exchange for something later. It doesn't make any sense to me. So these are my Easter thoughts. It was such a special week. Being able to hang out with my parents and to be able to have these crazy God conversations, come home with these amazing books, and then to see these rants from Christmas trees and bunnies and eggs. Oh, and by the way, after my kids did their Easter egg hunting and we opened up our baskets, a 7-year-old got baptized at church. It was the most beautiful thing. We all cried because where we are as a family, eggs, bunnies, and all, are because God is first in this house. I was talking to another friend today, and 4 years ago, I was looking at my life and it was depressing and I was burning it to the ground. I was afraid. I didn't know who I was. I didn't have any relationship to my wife, to anything that I was doing. I had no reason. I had no passion, no nothing. And today we're talking about what freedom looks like. We're talking about who you have to become to be free. Conversations, friends, I don't think I would have been able to have 4 years ago. I didn't even know if I could make it through the day. There's a cost. There's a cost to not knowing what you believe and why. There's a cost to robbing yourselves, your families, and your friends of joy by things that are lost in translation. There's a cost to doing nothing. This is Alan Wiederhold, and this is the cost of doing nothing.